Welcome to The Rest of the Moose,
Where's the rest of this moose?
a podcast about anything and everything.
You must have hated this moose.
Here's your host, Chris Grum.
And no, I don't hate the moose. And no, I don't hate you, but I have been a bit remiss after we dropped our debut episode to continue the podcast. And every once in a while, business is going to get in the way, and the podcast is going to have to take a bad seat. But my goal always is to bring at least one new episode a week to this podcast so that you'll find something to listen to, or at least something to turn off halfway through, whichever version you choose to do. However, today I did want to get on, and I'm a day late, but not $1 short, I might add, because yesterday was so busy. But I intended yesterday, which was Thursday, the 22nd of August, to talk about a show I saw on Wednesday night, which was the revival of Funny Girl at the Hobby Center. And it was the final show in last season for the Broadway Across America season, and maybe for my money, the best show of the entire season. And I used to do Broadway reviews on my blog, and I enjoyed the writing because I like creative writing, and I enjoyed being able to express my thoughts on something that I love in musical theater. But the time constraints right now, with being an author on a set of books that I'm working on with other travel advisors, with Scott and Michael, and then also with the business side of things, there really just isn't the time to do creative writing. And it would take time to write those reviews. And so what I've done is kind of transferred everything over to this podcast, which I think makes it a bit easier for people that do want to hear what I have to say about the shows, which is 2 or 3 of you. Makes it easier for you to do it because you can do it in the car or wherever. But I wanted to talk about Funny Girl because not only did I enjoy the show a lot more than I expected, but I also got to see what I will describe as maybe a once-in-a-generation talent on that stage. And we'll talk about her in just a minute. But for those of you that are not familiar with Funny Girl, let me kind of set the stage for you a bit. This is a show that was written by the same team, basically, that wrote Gypsy, another musical that is similar in a lot of ways to Funny Girl in its structure and its musical type. Jewel Stein, one of the major people involved in the writing of the show. But Funny Girl was the vehicle that launched Barbra Streisand, basically. She was in the Broadway show in the 60s and then later in the movie, and then I believe the sequel as well. But Funny Girl is what kind of put Barbra Streisand on the map. And 2 of her biggest hits, and in fact, one of them, People, came out of this show, and so did Don't Rain on My Parade, which, of course, I think in the musical theater canon, there are songs that people that are even not musical theater fans know, and Don't Rain on My Parade is one of those. Now, the show came out in the 60s and never really had a big Broadway revival until a couple of years ago when it came back to New York. And there was a lot of controversy surrounding that production. And I'm not going to delve too much into that, but it's kind of fun to have a little bit of history here. So the show opened with Beanie Feldstein as Fanny Brice. And to be as kind as I can, the reviews were very mixed. And there was a lot of stuff about, is she missing a lot of performances because she can't do the role, or is it because she's taking time off when you expect somebody to do 7 to 8 shows a week, which is what most people do on Broadway. There was a lot of controversy there. And there were people that loved her in the role and people that thought she was completely miscast. And so she wound up leaving the show. And when she left, they replaced her with Leah Michele. Now, Leah Michele, for those of you that used to watch Glee, would be familiar with her. Broadway people will know her from Spring Awakening and from, if you want to go back further, even Les Miserables. But Leah had her own issues because the rumors are to be believed, on Glee, she wasn't the nicest person. And the rumors even go back to her Broadway days that she was not a very easy person to work with. Now, I can't tell you here nor there. I've never met the lady. But the rumors are what they are. And so a lot of people, when they found out she was going to go back to Broadway, were like, how is this going to be received? And how will she be received by her fellow cast members? But the thing that was interesting was, if you watch Glee, her character, Rachel, she had one role that she always wanted to play, and it was Fanny Brice in Funny Girl. And then that wound up coming true for Leah on Broadway. And by all accounts, she was very well behaved and very well received. And they even wound up recording a cast album with her on the album. And normally you do that with the original cast. So the fact that they used her might speak to how they thought of Beanie's performance or how well they thought of Lea Michele's performance. But the bottom line is she wound up bringing the show to new heights. Everybody says that she was just spectacular in the show, and the show did relatively well for a revival and stayed open for quite a while until Lea left. And then, of course, this is a very difficult role to cast, so it wound up closing after that. But they announced a national tour, and when they did, everybody's like, well, who is going to do this role? Because number one, it's an iconic role, but number two, it is an extremely difficult role to sing and perform because it is just, first of all, it's iconic, and second of all, she rarely leaves the stage. I mean, she is in almost every song, and some of them are very, very difficult to sing. So they wound up casting a young lady named Katerina McCrimmon. And Katerina is from Miami, Florida. She's done a couple of shows on Broadway. She was in The Rose Tattoo at the Roundabout Theater Company. She's done some other theater in New York City, done a bit of work here and there. And she's also a songwriter, has an album out. But as far as name recognition in the Broadway community, she was at the bottom rungs of the ladder, let's put it that way. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. She's not a name that even somebody like me that's a big fan would recognize right away. But I had heard through the grapevine that she was very, very good in this role, so I was excited to see her in the show. And I got even more excited to see the Funny Girl Tour when I found out that her mom, Mrs. Bryce, in the show, was going to be played by Melissa Manchester. Now, that's another name you may recognize. Melissa Manchester is somebody who's had a 50-year career, if you can imagine that, in the music industry. She had 19 Billboard charted hits, a Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter. The songs that you would know from her, Don't Cry Out Loud, also, You Should Hear How He Talks About You, and Midnight Blue was another one of her big hits. But she took on the role of Fanny's mom and did an absolutely phenomenal job with it. And it's a relatively big role. The thing that was interesting was because it is a New York and Jewish family, they kind of did these accents. And so when she was singing with the accent. So you didn't get the full Melissa Manchester sound, if you follow what I'm saying. It was more of a kind of a character singing, but she did a phenomenal job in the show. Now, we found out later that this stop in Houston is the last week of the first year of the tour, which means a lot of the people that are in the cast may be leaving after the Houston leg. And it turns out, because Katerina posted it on her Instagram yesterday, this is her final week as Fanny Bryce. So you want to talk about the stars aligning and me being able to get to see, and the rest of Houston for that matter, this incredible talent before she leaves the show. So I was prepared to see a great performance, but this transcended. I don't even have the words to describe how good she was in this role. And what was really interesting to me was there were times where you could close your eyes and think you were listening to a very young Barbra Streisand. But there were also times, and more often than not, that she was making that role her own while still being faithful to the source material and a slight nod of the hat to the movie and the original stage show. Because for my money, I don't want to see somebody go in and just duplicate what was already done. I want to see them. Certainly, I want to hear the song sung a certain way. I want to see the show that I know and love. But I want to see your take on it, if that makes sense. And one of the criticisms I always had of the producers and its subsequent productions after Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick were in it, was that a lot of the people that played Max Bialystock, which was the Nathan Lane character, played it like Nathan Lane, even to the point of doing a Nathan Lane voice. And it was almost like a caricature of what role he created. Now, look, let's be honest. Nathan Lane is Nathan Lane in a lot of the things that he does. He brings a certain touch of himself to it. And I think, to be honest, any actor to a certain degree brings a little bit of themselves to any role. But those were almost becoming, it was almost, I said caricature, but it was almost campy. It really was just kind of bordering on okay, this is ridiculous. Let's find a way to do something a little bit different. And that's what I thought Katerina did very, very well, is she made it her own while at the same time being faithful to the source material. The other thing that she did is she sang the hell out of every song that she sang. And that's not to say that she was belting the entire song, but let me tell you, she's got a range. When she did People, and it was soft and, people who need people, it was very soft. And then that belt came in, and she was blowing the roof off that theater. And when she did Don't Rain on My Parade, which is the Act 1 closer, you could hear a pin drop, and people were applauding in the middle of songs. And that should tell you something. You really, I think we're a little too overindulgent with our standing ovations these days. But she stopped the show several times on Wednesday night. Don't Rain on My Parade. She stopped it with her 11 o'clock number in Act 2, which is the music that makes me dance. Just absolutely a showstopper and a talent like I haven't seen on stage in a long time. And I don't usually go to the Stage Door in Houston. It's usually late, it's hot, and I just don't have a lot of incentive to do it. The last time I did it was when Christy Altomar was at the Alley Theater, and I've been a huge fan of Christy's for a long time and wanted to get a chance to meet her. I went to the Stage Door because I wanted to have a signed playbill from Katerina McCrimmon to put on my playbill wall, which has got probably 50 playbills on it. She's going to be a superstar one of these days. It may be in the music industry, and it may be in the Broadway industry, and it quite frankly could be both. But I wanted to have a record of, wow, I saw her back when. And I'm focusing a lot on her. Let me tell you, the rest of the company was absolutely phenomenal. Got to meet a few of them as well. In fact, I'll name a couple of people that I got to meet. Rodney Thompson, who played John, and Isaiah Montague Harris, who played Eddie Ryan, came out to the Stage Door. And I have to say, with Eddie, Isaiah, you don't get to see tap dancing in a lot of shows nowadays, sadly. The tap dancing was on point in this show, and it was really great to see it featured. I think the last show that I saw extensive tap dancing in was Newsies, and so it's really nice to get to see that featured. And it was also nice to get to say hello to the guy that played Dick Armstein, which is Fanny Brice's husband, Stephen Mark Lucas, who was just fantastic in the role. He actually understudied on Broadway the role that he's now playing in the tour. And he and the entire cast, the ensemble, were just spot on. This was a 5-star production. It closes this weekend. If you can find a ticket, definitely go see it. In fact, I'd go see it again if I didn't already have plans this weekend. It's that good a show. And to give you just a little bit of background on what the show's about, Fanny Brice, it's kind of a semi-autobiographical story of Fanny Brice, who was rags to riches story. She came from nowhere, and basic poverty, and rose her way up through vaudeville and the Ziegfeld Follies and those types of shows to become a superstar. But her marriage was not the best, and I'll kind of let that take its course if you see the show. And there was a lot of things going on with that. Basically, she met a gambler, and you can probably guess where that's headed. But they did a great job of telling the story. The songs are ones you know. Like I said, People, Don't Rain on My Parade. And there's several others in there that are ones that you go, oh, yeah, I remember that song now. And they're all beautifully sung. The orchestra sounded amazing. And then one other shout out I want to give, because those of us that are radio people, we always hate our voices, but we love other people's. And the guy that played Florenz Ziegfeld, his name is Walter Coppage. Everybody wants that voice. Man, did he have a set of pipes. And it was perfect for the role of Ziegfeld in this show. But the costumes, the scenery, it's not the most beautiful set that I've ever seen, but it worked perfectly for this particular tour. And the talent on that stage, from Katerina McCrimmon on down to the understudies and the ensemble, is out of this world. And it's also the first time I've been at a Stage Door and heard, not that other actors don't talk about other actors, but a lot of times, they'll talk to you about their performance. They'll talk to you about what's going on with them. And I heard several of the people that were coming out there talking about Katerina and how talented she was and how they thought she's going to be a star someday. They all see it. I see it. And I think the world will see it at some point. But what an incredible talent and an incredible show. Funny Girl. It's at the Hobby Center through August 25th. This episode's dropping on Friday the 23rd, so not a lot of time to see it. But if it does come back around or if you see it in another city, go catch this show. You will not be disappointed.
You've been listening to the Rest of the Moose podcast, hosted by Chris Grum.
Why don't you forget the moose for a moment?
Previous episodes are available online at chrisgrum.com. See you next time for the Rest of the Moose.